Today I am in San Antonio, Texas, in the home of Barney Reams. Barney, as a member of the faculty at St. Mary's University School of Law here in the city. For many years he was a law librarian, director, and your career actually spans about 40 years, as I understand.
42.
42. Mm-hmm. Now, it's my understanding, of course, when we came over here this morning, you said that you might not retire, but you're sort of in a phased retirement officially at this point.
Exactly.
You're supposed to retire this summer in about a month.
Right.
But I understand the dean approached you. If I got a deal, I'd like to talk you into it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that
Well, of
before
course,
we begin?
that's a good way to talk. The dean of the law school is brand new. He just has been on the job for maybe 2 months. And he's got very energetic ideas, and he's got lots of things he wants to do. And he's asked me to not retire for 2 years and to come back as a full-time professor. We're talking an 11-month contract right now for each year, and to see if I can institute a Master of Jurisprudence and a Master of Health Law degree program as one of the new innovations he wants to institute to attract a different kind of student body, since these would be folks who are in the health arena doing different kinds of health and medical practices but don't want to be a lawyer. So a lot of law schools are going in that direction, and I just came back from the meeting in San Francisco where we learned a lot of ways in which to start these new innovative programs. In this day and age in legal education, we're all trying to be innovative to attract a different kind of student body.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, sort of with that said, could you go and talk a little bit about what life was like when you were young and perhaps today?
Well, let's just reflect on my growth in my career. And I started off after college going to right out of Lynchburg College, mm-hmm. going to the Drexel Institute of Technology in Philadelphia. It was one of those ALA accredited schools. It was in Philadelphia, a city I liked, and that's where I did my master's in library science. They had a quarter system, so you could go through right straight through in about 1.5 years, get your master's, and that's where I started with my Master of Science in Library Science. And then after that I had to go to work, and it was during the Vietnam War, mm-hmm. and I was doing everything I could to try to stay out of the war, and what I ended up doing was getting a job at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey, one of the 3 branch campuses of Rutgers University, which is right across from Philadelphia. It was very convenient. Mm-hmm. But it also had the convenience of having one of the 2 law schools in the state. The South Jersey campus had the law school, and North Jersey up in Newark had a law school. And they were both spin-offs of the old YMCA law schools that mm-hmm. existed up until World War II, and when all the GIs came back, they turned these into state universities so all these guys could get law degrees. I worked for the Maine University Library, and then I got to be very good friends with a man called Albert Blaustein. He was relatively famous as a law librarian in his own mind.
I remember him, yeah.
In his own mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was very flamboyant.
He was fairly accomplished author.
Oh yeah, he published like crazy, and he's the one that taught me about publishing. Mm-hmm. Al had the distinct advantage of having gone to the University of Michigan in his youth and gotten a degree in journalism. And his idea was you have to be one step ahead of where the law is going. And by staying attuned to the new developments of the law and anticipating it, you could write books that would be there when this stuff suddenly became important. Mm-hmm. And that was something that helped me a lot later on in my publishing, specifically the Hine Company, looking at legislation and the way in which the Congress acted and trying to get legislative histories done. But he was a genius in a lot of ways, mm-hmm. a character in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. He was very funny, very self-confident, and so it was a great start. But I wasn't in his library, and he kept saying, "Come to law school, come to law school." And I was thinking about it, but I had the money. I was deferred from the draft because I was over in the essentials of the national defense, and it worked. Mm-hmm. So I met my first wife, who's now deceased, and she was a legal secretary. And she told me, you know, you need to go to law school. And so I went to the dean of the law school, a guy named Russell Fairbanks, and I said, look, is there any way I can start taking law courses on a part-time basis? The rules don't allow it, but could I do it and see if I can be successful at it? Well, yeah, submit your scores and submit your transcripts, and I'll let you take law courses. And so I took a first year of law courses at Rutgers Camden, which was really a half-year law course because I had to spread them out over 2 semesters. Did quite well. And in the meantime, there was an ad that showed up in the New York Times that said, law librarian, the University of Kansas has a vacancy for a law library director, opportunity to take law courses, and a man's name to contact at the Lawrence campus. So on a lark, Bridget and I sat down, put a resume together, and we mailed it out to Lawrence, Kansas. And I never heard another word. It just died. And so, okay, AALL was meeting in Philadelphia, and I went over and interviewed for schools that had night schools to see if I could get a library job that would allow me to go to night school, because I didn't have a lot of money, like most of the students today, and I'm newly married and all the responsibilities there. Pretty good salary, but I'd have to leave that to go into the law library business. Well, nobody really was that excited about me because I had not worked in a law library. And so I didn't get any offers except from the guy who was running Emory Law School down in Georgia at the time, a Dutch guy whose name I've forgotten, Adrian Heinze, I think, something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember the name, yes.
Yeah, and it was dismal, an offer that I could refuse because it just didn't pay anything.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, this isn't working. And about that time, I get a phone call at work, in my library job, and says, I need to talk to you. I'm John Blinka. I'm the Associate Director of University of Kansas University Library System. So I had to go to a pay phone because I couldn't take this call at night, open desk where everyone could hear everything. And, they offered me an opportunity to come out and interview at the University of Kansas. Had to look it up on the map to be sure exactly where Lawrence was. I flew into Kansas City, and I had...
At least I hope you knew where Kansas was.
I knew where that was. And so I ended up interviewing there for 3 days. There was quite a bit of turmoil. The director, who was at a meeting of the American Association of Law Libraries, wasn't there. That was later. He was there for this interview. A very interesting guy he was Danish, had an American law degree, had a degree from University of Washington, Seattle, in librarianship, and was a member of the Missouri Bar. He had gone to St. Louis University. But being Danish, he had a lot of this European lawyer arrogance that he had brought with him. His name was Finn Henriksen, and people may remember him.
Oh, I remember Finn.
He was an absolute character. Always nice to me. I mean, I'm not saying anything derogatory. It's just reflection on personality traits. And he had a war with faculty. He was not one of their favorite people. For what reasons, I don't know, but one of them was he insisted on being called Dr. Henriksen because he had a Juris Doctor from St. Louis University, and in Denmark, this was what you did.
Well, that's sort of the European tradition.
It is.
Very conscious of degrees.
Well, I'm known as D Reams in Innsbruck, with the law faculty when I teach there, so it's just an interesting dimension, but it's supposed to show respect. It's basically being respectful to somebody's accomplishments. But he was a double problem was he had a bit of a speech impediment with his Danish accent, and so even with my hearing issues, I had to really strain to understand what he was talking about. At the end of the interview, the dean of the law school took me aside and said, "We're very impressed with you. We have had some dismal people come through. We would like to make you an offer. I will get that offer to you in 3 days. What you need to understand is that I want you to report on July 1, which is their budget year, and Finn Henriksen will be gone. He doesn't have tenure, and we're going to pay him off to leave." So there was that kind of tension that was going on there.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I took the job, came on board. Finn was there for a few days. The nice thing about that job is I got to take law courses for no cost. I didn't pay any tuition.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me my books. So I was paid dismally.
Yeah.
I think the salary in those
Now
days.
that was a state school.
State
Now the
university.
tradition in private higher ed is the faculty and families get tuition benefits.
They do, but not
In
at
states,
state
it's
institutions.
unusual,
No.
I would think.
No, we didn't have any benefits like that, but they waived it, which was a great benefit.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, there are some minimal costs that were involved for us, a fee here and a fee there, but it was basically a given. And they paid me the great big salary, if I'm not mistaken, I was making at that time $13,000 a year.
Yeah.
$13,000.
About what the going rate was for
Yeah.
many of us at
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
point in time.
And I thought it was quite comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence wasn't expensive. We had decent rent. And so for the next, not 3 years, 4 years, because I had to take summer courses to catch up for the spread of the courses as I went through,
Mm-hmm.
the dean of the law school had changed, we had a new one, and he said, well, when you finish your degree and pass the bar, we can make you an assistant professor of law.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, that's interesting. His name was Martin Dickinson. We're still friendly. And he said, yeah, you will be just starting off. And I said, well, Martin, I have some interviews scheduled at other schools. And frankly, they're not looking at the date on my diploma. They're looking at my skills and talents.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nobody's going to hire you. He said, you haven't done anything but run this library and go to law school. I said, okay, fine. That was a challenge, by the way.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah. And then he said, you know, after 7 years of an assistant professor, and you write some articles or get a book out, we can consider you for tenure. So now I'm going to be an untenured professor at an assistant professor level, which is the only assistant professor at the University of Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
law school. Everybody else was hired as associate. And I said, okay, well, let's see where it goes. So I passed the bar, had my law degree, and I went interviewing. And one of the real fine interviews I had was at University of Tulsa, which was at that time looking for a more professional staff. They were expanding, had a great dean down there,
Mm-hmm.
a federal judge. He later became a federal judge. And I met Jim McHugh there. He was in his last year of law school at the University of Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stayed friends ever since. He's one of those connections that you make when you go on these interviews and you stay friends with these folks. It's a great business, this librarianship.
Mm-hmm.
So then got the offer from there. And I had several other interviews that were in the process, but the one I was most pleased with was the Washington University in St. Louis invited me over.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been in a similar situation to what had transpired at Kansas. We were in a position where libraries were transforming, and they were bringing in what was modern technology like microfilm and microfiche.
Mm-hmm.
My students used to say there's something fishy about that. But you know,
They were right.
Yeah, they were. And you know, we were building collections and buying archival materials, and it was a growth area for collection development, something that was just waiting to go. So the new dean there, his name was Tad Foote, Edward Thaddeus Foote, later became president at the University of Miami. But he was hiring a new dean, young man, and they brought in a series of candidates and got back to me and said they wanted me to come join them.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to my wife, and she said, yep, let's go to St. Louis. And I talked to the dean of the law school, who said, you can't get that job. They're not paying you that much. $21,500, I'll have you know. And that, to me, it was a lot of money compared to Kansas, which...
Because you were going in as a real director.
And not only that, I came in as an assistant professor with 1 year to get tenure.
All right.
And then after that, they would put me in the rotation with all the other professors. And they were hiring assistant professors, not associates. So I went there. First year in, I got my tenure because I wrote that book with the Hine Company.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I did was write legislative histories and all kinds of compilations and research materials that lawyers wanted and that faculty wanted, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Became a prolific writer for the Hine Company.
Now, before we go into discussion more of your scholarship, could we talk a little bit about the St. Louis job? Because you went into St. Louis, you succeeded a woman, Jean Ashman, who had
Wonderful
been around a
Wonderful
long
lady.
time.
Yeah.
And as you say, times were changing and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
Do you have any tidbits about her that
Yeah,
you can
sure.
remember? 'Cause-
Jean, I had first met at the very first library meeting I ever went to.
Mhm.
And that was at the Southwest Association of Law Libraries meeting in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Mhm.
I don't remember the year, a while back. And my wife and I drove because Kansas was not paying a lot of money to get there, so I
Yeah.
had to get mileage. So I drove down there, stayed at the La Fonda Hotel, if I recall, and I met a lot of good people there. People from Roy Murphy's staff. Wally Gassaway was there. Others from Houston. Were you there? I'm not
I
sure.
was at Houston. I had gone, left Houston by then, but Lolly worked
She
with
was
me
still
there.
there.
Al Coco was our
Right.
director. And,
I met George Skinner. Remember George Skinner?
oh, I remember George, yeah.
Then I met Jean Ashman, who was, of course, there with her
Yeah.
her proverbial bourbon, painted lips, and cigarette.
Now today's readers may be a little surprised about all three of those, but especially the cigarette. 'Cause,
Well, times it's just like Mad Men era.
yeah,
You know, you walk into a conference room and everybody's smoking.
yeah.
And of course, everybody's drinking like in Mad Men, but librarians do that, right?
Well, we used to in our day.
Yeah, indeed. The open bar was there, and Skinner was the bartender. And I think, well, at any rate, it was quite a nice spread. And I enjoyed the meeting and getting to meet people. And Gene Ashman was very friendly, except at the end of the meeting, we came walking out. Maybe it was Lolly Gasway that was with me, I'm not sure. My wife, and we came out, and there, sitting between the elevators to go down from the conference room, is a chair with Gene Ashman planted on it. And she's sitting there kind of semi-comatose with a glass in this hand and a cigarette in this hand and said, "Will somebody help me get to my room?" And so we worked it, got her to the room just fine. It just kind of a proverbial Ashman story, you know. And then when I got to know her after I got the offer, she was generous and kind and friendly and worked me into that library system. It was a nice changeover. So I went there in 1973, 74. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's
You know, you and I started about the same. Excuse me, the same time. My first meeting was the same one in Philadelphia, which was yours,
Right.
which is 1968, I think.
That is 68, you're
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah. And so the people you've just described, I know too, for the same, well, for different reasons,
Yeah.
but we were colleagues.
Right. You were already in the business.
Well, I sort of had come up through Marion Gallagher's program.
And you had a law degree by then, I guess.
And I had the law
Yeah,
degree.
see, I didn't
So
have
I
that.
was one small step ahead of you at
Right,
that point. But you know, you caught up, and you ended up at St. Louis, and then I know you've had a variety of other positions. Now you're at St. Mary's, where you're actually a distinguished law professor
Thank
this
you,
year,
yes,
which
yeah.
I noticed is not a title they give just anybody on the faculty.
It was nice.
Yeah, so I guess you've worked up from your days of an assistant professor of law without tenure.
Well, I'm 42 years into being a law professor and librarian. They're all, you know, basically I was always joint appointed.
Yeah. Could you talk about your career between St. Louis and here at St. Mary's? Because
Sure.
I know you were up in New York. Was it St. John's?
St. John's.
John's, yeah.
That's an interesting
And-
story, yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about some of
Yeah.
your positions and maybe some of what you did in each one of them?
Right. Well, the great pride I had with Washington University was that I worked with Gene, very short, but it was a ripe area to make great strides. The one thing Gene told me, and she did this herself, always teach. Always have a course or courses. Always teach. And I did. I started teaching there. She left. I took over a couple seminars, and then I got into the health law area. But those were areas that emerged later. When I started law school, when I started there, they didn't teach health law, medical jurisprudence, or any kind of bioethics stuff. So I was the only one on the faculty who got into that area, going to conferences and meetings. We had a big medical school there, so it was a logical feedback between these institutions. So I was there for 22 years. Gene Ashman retired there after 20 years. So I was the longest and still have been the longest serving law librarian at Washington U in St. Louis. Things kind of got tough there, as we mentioned when we were talking before, that there are good deans and bad deans. And at that point in time, Washington University was being administered by an autocrat and a know-it-all, and wanted to give orders. And a former Marine, he acted like it, and you know,
Former Marine,
this just didn't fit within the mindset of my staff or my organization. Had a good friend over the years down at St. Louis University named Rudy Hassel, who was dean there. I got my PhD down there on a sabbatical one year. I went down and studied in the area of higher education administration, and it was a great program, and of course he and I even got to know each other better then. He left and became the dean at St. John's University in Jamaica, Queens, New York. At some point in the early 90s, early 90s, he called me and asked if I would talk to him at a conference, AALS conference, and I did, and he basically said, I want you to consider becoming my associate dean and law librarian at St. John's. The place is a mess, I need help, I need somebody I can trust, and it was a proverbial hornet's nest there. And over the years, sometimes timing is everything, and certainly going to WashU was timing, going to St. John's I thought would be timing also. He was a rising star in the deanship area, and he's promised to move me into an interview process to eventually become a dean. And so I went and became his associate dean and later associate dean for academic affairs, and I ran the law library when Julius Mark retired. And Julius was still around. He had an office there, it's kind of emeritus there.
That's right. Julius had been at New York U through most of his career, and then had gone after retiring at New York U to
there. His life after retirement, right?
Yeah.
For Julius there was. And he was also a very good friend and a great mentor, and full of stories. Julius is always full of stories. And so at that point I said, yeah, I'm in my 50s, I'm not getting any younger, let's just make a big move and leave 22 years in St. Louis and go. And the timing was right for the kids. Daughter was starting 9th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and my son was in college. So we were at a good timing point. Got to St. John's, started getting things turned around so that it was a pretty well-oiled professional machine. We had to make the proverbial staff changes, and of course that wasn't popular with the university personnel office, but when you had to make changes, you have to make changes, and it went relatively smoothly. It was during that process that I hired Mike Beard to become my associate director. But in the process of doing that, I was then moved from the library, and so Mike became kind of the day-to-day guy, and went upstairs to help the dean as associate dean for academic affairs. So I was wearing all these crazy hats, and the place was difficult. During that process of 3 years, the president of the university decided that Rudy had become a dinosaur, as they say, and asked him to step down.
Not uncommon for deans that get caught between the real needs of the law school and the perceived needs, as I'm speaking from my prejudiced position,
of
the institution,
right.
Which are sometimes conflict.
Well, his was a reverend president because it was a Vincentian school, and it was run like a Catholic school. And not being Catholic, some of this was still foreign to me, still is. I'm still trying to figure it out. But on the other hand, he crossed the president, and so his days were numbered, and he eventually resigned. And they appointed a young man who was an untenured professor. He was quite a hotshot and very energetic and somewhat obnoxious, named Brian Tamanaka, to become the acting dean.
Now, he came in without tenure?
Without tenure, right.
That, I think, is too smart.
Now, he impressed the president with all his kind of stuff. He is now the one who's written the book on the decline in law schools and legal education. That's not worth it. And that's become a bestseller in a lot of areas. And so Brian is now at Washington University in St. Louis. He's a chaired professor. So one rises to their level. But he called me in and said, you're not going to be a librarian, you're not going to be associate dean, you're just going to be a regular professor. And you got a grant for 2 months over in Hamburg at the Max Planck Institute. So go over there, and when you come back, we'll figure out what we're going to do with you. Fine, you're the boss. I got tenure, you can't fire me. I understand that. So that was it. I went over and did my visit for 2 months at the Max Planck Institute with Jürgen Godin, and came back to a call from a friend of mine, Kathy Buzang, at Seton Hall. And she said, you're teaching health law, you're teaching bioethics, why don't you come over and talk to me? So I went over to Seton Hall and I talked to her, and she said, why don't you come over here as a visiting professor because it's too hot over there for you. And I did. I said, that's great. So instead of driving the Throgs Neck Bridge every day this way, I drove the GW Bridge the other way, same distance, and went to Seton Hall and started teaching there. And I taught there for 2 years as a visitor. While I was there, in my last semester, I got a call from Bob Summers. And Bob says, are you still interested in library work? And I said, sure. And he said, well, my position's available, and I'm supposed to help collect names of candidates. So I was put in the list. I was one of the candidates they brought through. And during the interview process, I was given the offer to join Washington University. I'm sorry, St. Mary's University in San Antonio. Came into the library business again. Did that for 3 years. And that was another one of these situations which had all kinds of personnel issues. That's why Bob was having troubles. And so we got that all straightened up. In the meantime, I'm working with the dean that is losing faculty confidence and is going downhill. And he is struggling. And then he's trying to determine who his friends are and who his friends aren't. And for some reason, and I still have never figured it out, my little bastion of what I like to call neutral Switzerland was perceived to be not neutral anymore. And I have no clue how that ever happened. But I got in the crosshairs. And so he called me in one day and said, I don't like you're doing this, I don't like you're doing that. And I said, I'm not doing this. What are you talking about? You know, this is deans, right? He said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going back to work. And he said, no, you have to decide what you're going to do. And I said, I'm teaching courses and I'm running the library. He said, no, you're just going to teach courses. And he turned around on his computer and sent out a letter of resignation from me to all the faculty that I never signed, didn't even agree to. Well, short story is I sued him and I got everything worked out. Confidentiality, you know. But I'm not unhappy. And so I've been a happy camper there ever since.
Yeah. Well, Bob's still there too. In fact, we're
Bob will be
going to talk to him here in a few minutes.
Yeah,
He's
I
going
hope
to join us.
maybe he'll reflect on some of those issues too. But you know, we all like to look at the positive and the good things. What I found in law librarianship is that so much of what we do is contingent upon other parties. But basically, the interest that I discovered of deans in control, being control freaks, made for a very unhappy administrator. And most of these guys trusted you to do everything right, and I was always pleased with the way we were successful. But some of these guys wanted to control the money, wanted to control staff hiring, wanted to just get in your face, and were critical of whatever you did. I had one dean tell me that I had more discretionary money to spend than he did. Well, hello, what are we doing here? We're trying to be a fiduciary and spend the money to improve the collection and services to our users, right?
Yeah.
We're fiduciaries. And this guy wasn't a fiduciary. He wanted to have money to control that he could use to pay favors and do things with his faculty friends. That just was really bad. Service. I am active in a lot of different service interests. I've always had this, teaching research service, right? And the service component for me has always been working for eleemosynary institutions. Sam Ervin's famous word in the Watergate hearings, eleemosynary, right? Yeah, okay.
You remember it better than I do. I remember the hearings. I don't remember that word.
Well, at any rate, I've worked for charitable organizations in the communities I've been in. And in St. Louis I did that, then in Washington, at St. Mary's I did it. Here I've been working on the board of directors for the San Antonio Lighthouse for the Blind. And I'm now director emeritus. And that was kind of a good opportunity to get familiar with people in the community and to do public service. I'm in retirement now as I start to phase, and I'm now going to be looking for other opportunities to contribute to the community. I have a good friend who works in the immigration area, and as you know, South Texas has all kinds of migration and immigration issues, And I think I
certainly
might.
today they are in the news this week.
Yeah, it's just.
It's all these young people coming from Honduras and some of the countries down there.
And they need some kind of protection,
Yeah.
legal representation. And so I'll see what I can do as I start getting my time straightened out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still teaching. I will be teaching in the first semester 2 courses. And then supposedly, if I don't get this full-time situation worked out, I'll be free.
Yeah. So the dean wants you to start a new program. Yeah.
Yeah, part of this new legal education outreach to assure that our enrollments stay up.
Mm-hmm.
Innovative programs are the watchword. We're looking at starting a master's degree, tentatively titled Master of Jurisprudence,
Mm-hmm.
and also a Master of Health Law degree. Both of these would be for post-BA degree, but not law degrees.
But not law
Yeah.
students as such.
So these guys and gals will come through, either part-time, full-time, depending on how we do the curriculum, and would at the end of their studies get a degree that does not entitle them to take a bar exam.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a master's degree that is professionally focused so that they hopefully can take their training and skills and use it in whatever area of health and medical jurisprudence, whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the idea. We'll see if it falls into place. I'm excited about it. Yeah.
It sounds like it could be very exciting and an interesting twist and turn in the latter part of your career.
Well, we got a big medical school here with the University of Texas Medical Center, and then the Incarnate Word University has just announced it's going to be opening a brand new college of osteopathic medicine.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't even built it yet, but they're very innovative in physical therapy degrees, optometry degrees, pharmacy degrees. They're into that area. And St. Mary's does not tend to branch out into these kind of professional skills. It's more focused on liberal arts and what the basic education. And have an engineering school, we do. We have business school, we do. We have the fine arts school, music school. So it's a nice, solid university of a small basis.
Mm-hmm.
Incarnate Word is much more of an entrepreneur, and but it's a medical school, and so maybe we can have some relationships there with the osteopathic physicians and with the medical school here, joint courses, exchange of people, but certainly use those as potential students, people who come and get a master's with a legal focus.
Why don't we now sort of move into your scholarship? You've already mentioned that you've done some publishing for the Hine Company over the years. You have done actually quite a bit of publications over the years. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that scholarship, and then maybe also work into some of your teaching, which I suppose interconnects with some of the scholarship as well?
Oh, it does.
Yeah, it usually
We're
does.
supposed to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea.
right.
Yeah.
I, as I mentioned before, Al Blaustein said, try to anticipate where the law is going and write about it before it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that had served me well over the years with the Hine Company during their legislative history series.
Mm-hmm.
I think which most of them are on Hine Online, I suspect.
I suspect they all are.
I think
It's a
so.
lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And enjoyed doing it, had fun doing the research, rolling up my sleeves and getting into the archives. One of the most exciting times I had as a researcher, and this was years ago, is I did a compilation on price and wage controls. Back when Richard Nixon started the price and wage control program.
Mm-hmm.
Short-lived, but also didn't work, and most price and wage controls don't work, although they're usually instituted during times of war. So I needed to get together all this documentation, and I went back and spent actually weeks off and on at the National Archives. Originally in downtown D.C. in an old ramshackle building, and it was later collected and moved out to Suitland, Maryland, where they had old Nike bunkers. They turned those into the National Archives storage areas. What I was using was the original Superintendent of Documents collection, where the Superintendent of Documents had one copy at least of everything the government printing office ever printed. So they had moved this into the basement, and I went back and I had all these different SUDOC numbers where I was trying to locate missing documents and missing material. And the gentleman who was overseeing that area broke some of the rules by saying, hell, just come on down into the stacks with me, and you can browse along, and here's the area where you can spread out the stuff. So instead of paging it and have it brought up, I was able to go down into the inner sanctum.
That must have been a godsend.
Oh my God, the
Yeah.
serendipity of it all.
Yeah.
The serendipity. Oh my God, here's something that's great, and it's marked not for publication or distribution, right? So there were all these quasi-secret documents that agencies or Congress had wanted printed, but that were not ever distributed as part of the SUDOC collection, and they're there. So I was able to at least identify them, mark them in the bibliography as noted as not for publication, and discovered, in fact, many more legislative history items that I never knew existed, and are still not obtainable normally through the SUDOC searches. That was amazing. And you know, you feel like you're in a treasure hunt, and you find such wonderful things through this serendipity. So I got a great bit of information there, and was eventually published by Hine in the reprint, of the price and wage controls documents. And then I did a bibliography that appeared in Law Library Journal. So that was kind of one of the things that really got me excited about this process. Actually, the whole set was printed in Taiwan. In those days, it was cheaper to print this stuff overseas and then ship it back.
Probably still is.
So it could be, yeah. But that was one of my most thoroughly researched sets ever, and that set the tone for the sets that followed after it. Taxation, all the tax materials.
And they were landmarks.
Yeah, immigration and naturalization stuff. And that I was encouraged to do by my friend Igor Kavas, who worked also with the Hine Company on different things.
Yeah. Igor was also a law librarian.
Last job was at Vanderbilt, and he had been at Duke, and then he had been before that at Northwestern, and then before that at Alabama. And a very good friend of mine, I liked Igor. I was at his funeral, and I made remarks. He and Carmen were there for me when I was having my ups and downs with my wife's passing, and I'm immensely good friends, and I miss Igor greatly. We had a lot of good journeys in the International Association of Law Libraries too. But yeah, the scholarship is important, and as Gene Ashman said, always teach, and Blaustein says always publish. You just kind of store these there. What do we
We have
do?
a couple of mentors in the background who gave you both sides of this.
Well, I wasn't far away from Roy Mirsky in certain ways. Roy and I had our ups and downs.
Yeah.
I could never also figure out where I was on his happy list or not happy list, but whatever it was, I ended up on his happy list in the end, and we were good friends for years, and in very close proximity. So I miss him greatly. He always had insight and experiences and stories, right? And a character, as we all know.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Roy connects to this oral history. I think I mentioned this when we were coming over in the car,
Right.
but I've never actually said it on camera. Roy died the same year Bob Oakley, both of whom were really significant in our field. And my understanding, I wasn't part of the history project at that point, but that's part of the catalyst that triggered this oral history of law librarianship, because these two luminaries were suddenly not here, and they, with their demise, went all this information, these stories, and now we're trying to build that with the oral history. So I'm delighted to be here in your home this morning.
Well, I'll just give you a little aside here that, these things are serendipitous that come to mind, right? The first big meeting of the association I went to was in Los Angeles.
All right.
We were at Century City.
City, yeah.
Beautiful hotel, great food.
We went to the movie lot one night for the opening reception.
I did.
Remember that?
Yeah. It was good. Well, there I met for the first time. I met Roy Mirsky. I met Myron Jacobstein.
Okay.
And Myron was such a cool guy. He was so nice and so friendly. And come with me, young man, I want to talk to you. And we had breakfast together that went till noon with just him telling me stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, I really like Myron Jacobstein. I did. Roy, well, Roy's Roy. It's ups and downs, right? And the other guy I really liked was my former mentor. I took a course at Drexel in law librarianship, and that was Morris Cohen.
Oh,
And Morris
okay.
was very helpful and friendly.
Mhm.
And so the three rabbis became more friends of mine during this process. And they were just always sources you could turn to for help and guidance. And
That was a
that's
characteristic that I think many of us found about the profession,
Right.
is how open they were to those of us that were at that point just coming in.
I mean, I had no clue about a lot of stuff. And it's like, come here, young man, I'll tell you what to do. And they were very, very helpful. And Roy actually invited me down to Austin a couple of times to spend time with his staff, and that a great opportunity to learn from those guys.
Roy was one of those mentors to so many of our colleagues, in the right sense of mentor as well. And
he provided me with a staff at WashU. You know,
Yeah.
he would send up different staff members and I'd hire them.
Yeah, people would go to work for Roy for maybe a couple of years, and he wouldn't overpay them, but he'd train them, and they would know the business, and they got out of there.
Well, Jim McHugh was one too.
Exactly.
He went to the book publishing end, but he was.
Yeah, that's
one
right.
man.
Jim was in the law book selling business mostly.
Did Mike Beard not work for Roy? I think he did.
Yeah, Mike, I think
worked
did
him,
for a while too.
Then he
yeah.
went to Butterworth.
Yeah.
Yeah, good people. Anyway, I kind of digressed there. Where were we?
Well, we were talking about some of your scholarship.
Okay,
And
let's,
we were going to talk a little bit about some of your teaching.
Okay, scholarship. One of the things that I did that I'm really proud of is the Federal Legislative History Bibliography. That took years and years to complete. It was a spin-off of some of these searches into the National Archives. Finally got that published, and it's still a classic. I got the Andrews Award for that, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment. And the other books that I have done, the most recent one is I'm teaching in the area of community property law in Texas, which is basically matrimonial law.
Yeah.
Okay. Texas has very specific rules. California has very specific rules. All the 9 community property states have their own variations and deviations.
Washington State, where I'm admitted as a community property state
yes.
as well, is our several of them from about Texas west and then up the west coast, except for Oregon is not.
Oregon is not.
But Idaho is.
And Wisconsin's quasi. I mean, it
Yeah.
can be. But, you know, it's just an interesting, most of these are the old Spanish states. And I kind of liked it because when I got into becoming familiar with it, I had to take the Texas bar, so you had to become familiar with community property, and I sat there and said,
It'd be a little hard to practice in the state of Texas in many cases, unless you knew the community property aspects of it.
So I did.
Dealing with married clients.
I'm teaching it, and I'm amazingly skilled at it. Brag, brag. The book that I published is called Texas Community Property Matrimonial Law, and it's published by Walter Sklar. And in fact, it's right here. I'll just put it up.
Hold it up for the camera.
Yeah. Case book, folks.
Ah, very good.
Yeah. And so I got
We'll send you a bill here for publicity. Is that your publisher?
I think the sales of this thing are primarily to law schools in Texas and maybe to a few practitioners, because outside of Texas, it's not a lot of interest in.
You know, it's
Texas
interesting. When I was in law school, Harry M. Cross was a faculty member at the University of Washington. Back in the early years, there was a big symposium in the Louisiana Law Review on community property laws. You've probably seen it.
I've seen it.
Volume
I know it.
15.
Yeah.
And Harry wrote the article on Washington State's community property law, and it was basically the Bible for all of us.
Yeah.
And we had, reproductions for class handouts and so on, and he used to joke and said that he should have retained the rights to charge for it. Because he could have made a fortune with that article around that state.
We all make those mistakes.
Yeah, I guess so. Well,
Somebody
his
else has the
mistake was our
copyright, right?
benefit. It was expensive enough to go to law school even in those days.
It was. I mean, we were all struggling. I don't think I ever planned to get wealthy in law school, and I certainly haven't.
So you teach community property, or you have?
I'm teaching community property this next semester, and I'm teaching wills and estates.
Okay. Well, they go together
they do.
in a community property state.
They
certainly.
do. In fact, they're all bar courses too. So I have a lot of students. I'm
I
pretty popular
imagine
for
the
that.
students pay rapt attention.
Well, they should, but today's law students tend to spend too much time staring at their laptop computers and exploring Victoria's Secret catalogs and Crate and Barrel and that stuff. It just is a very upsetting phenomenon to see how indifferent some of these students are to the learning process. Some of my faculty are starting to ban laptop computers in their classroom.
I have heard, I had a colleague who did that even back when I was still active, but I wondered if that was something you could really do these days, because they're so, they use for so much stuff.
Well, a lot
Not
of
all
them-
of which is legit.
No, not what as you see, but well, yeah, a lot of them use it for outlines and have my case book is available in digital form.
Uh-huh.
If you buy the book, you get the digital form, and they load it into their computer and they make their notes based on that. So I've been immensely reluctant to change that, but when I walk along in the classroom and I see them doing this stuff, I make a comment.
Yeah.
I said, you know,
I don't know, I sort of took the attitude when I was teaching that if they could learn the material and perform well on the exam, I wasn't going to second guess how they did it. It just made life easier probably for them and for me to
well,
take that attitude.
I'm pretty liberal that way too, Pat.
Yeah.
It just disturbs me they're paying this kind of money and they're not focusing.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably something that comes with the distractions of these smartphones and these new electronic devices and iPads and stuff. You can't really focus in the old way, but you know, far be it from me. My kids are all skilled with that stuff. I'm not.
Maybe the people that do it are focusing a lot more than you and I would realize.
I would give them that.
Yeah.
I can't, you know, don't wear their shoes. I don't want to be judgmental. I just find it disturbing that you don't focus.
Yeah. Well, I thought too that they were sort of wasting opportunities that they'd paid for or somebody had paid for.
Yeah.
But if, you know, I figured they were adults, they were pretty skilled at learning, or they wouldn't have been in law school at that point. And, you
Well,
know,
one would
I
like
just
to think that.
I stopped second guessing them.
You know, I'd like to think that when I was in law school, as I mentioned, it was in the 69 to 72 era, and I had all these Vietnam vets coming back. And those folks, mostly men, we only had 2 women in my class, were all focused on getting out of there and getting to work. They had a future. They lived through the war. They survived. Some were wounded. Others were just motivated. And that was the classrooms I was in. They wanted to get everything they could, pass the bar exam and get to work. And they were really successful. I like that generation of folks. Glad I was part of it.
Ordinarily, I asked this sort of earlier on in the conversation, but I didn't ask it yet, and that is, do you have any particular hobbies or pursuits in addition to your academic work? I know you and your wife have a home in Austria, near Innsbruck. Do you have?
That's why I'm wearing the program shirt.
Yeah, I see that. Do you have any hobbies or travel is perhaps an interest?
Well, travel definitely is it. I have friends in Germany in specifically because of my Max Planck grants. I had 4
I remember
of those.
you worked over there for
4 times, and I loved it. And my great friend Jürgen Godin's now retired, and he's in pretty good health the last time I talked to him, but I've got to get back. This year we're not going over. Leanne just went over for a month and came back. Her mother lives in San Antonio now, 87-year-old cancer survivor.
Oh.
So I have to be around when she's gone, and she has to be around if I'm gone, because she needs to be watched over. She's had 3 bouts of pneumonia, and it's not good. So she's doing pretty good right now, but that's kind of tied us down. And unless I have somebody here I can depend on to watch over her or be there for her, it makes foreign travel right now a little difficult.
Yeah, I thought when I first approached you, because the ALL's annual meeting is here in San Antonio right now, and that's what brought me to the city, and I wanted to talk to you for the conversation, and but I wasn't sure whether you would be here or over in Europe.
Well, this is the first summer since the year 2000. 2000 is the only summer I spent in San Antonio. After that, I was either on Max Planck grants or I was teaching in the Innsbruck program and got the hell out of here because it's hot. And this is the first summer since the year 2000 that I've been here. So, yeah, I just haven't been around for meetings. And I love teaching over there. It's a great opportunity. We bring Supreme Court justices over. So, got pictures on the wall, right, of, Scalia and Thomas and Alito and Roberts and Sandra Day O'Connor, and these are all folks.
So they're not all on one end of the court; they're sort of across the spectrum.
Well, we weigh heavy for the conservative end, which is reflective of their wanting to participate. We have tried to get the more balanced group, but they're all
Well,
preoccupied.
you have competition for the justices
Yeah.
in the summer.
So it's been kind of hard. But I've retired from that program now too. Time for younger people to hop in there and do it. Yeah. But you get to know these guys and their families, and you take them out to eat, and you wine and dine them, and you tell them what is the best place to go to see opera is in Vienna and that kind of
I
stuff.
mean, they're just regular people like the rest
They
of
are,
us.
yeah.
They may have fancy robes on certain days of the week
Well,
during the term, but
If you were to ask me what the biggest surprise was on having all these guys come through, I would say it's Clarence Thomas. He is the kind of guy that you would like to have for your next door neighbor and have a few
yeah,
beers
he
with.
usually doesn't say much.
Oh, he was talking like crazy over there, but he doesn't drink, so you can't have a few beers with him. But he is quite an interesting character and has all kinds of thoughts about all kinds of, an intellectual guy, I think. You just don't see it. And but have him come over and sit on your back deck and converse and have some hamburgers and stuff. He would probably be the most likely in my book, and that was a total surprise.
So
just a total.
just
surprise.
plain folks. Huh?
Yeah, just a total surprise. Alito is fun, and he and Martha Ann are just a hoot as a couple. Scalia, a little more Scalia-ish, he is aging and slowing down and very, very, very arrogant and opinionated.
Well, I guess he's earned that right.
Yeah, you just take it, But he's been very nice to me, and I don't mean to be demeaning, it's just what comes with the territory. And that's been a great experience to be able to participate in that.
I remember over the years when I was in Washington, I'd be down at the Supreme Court building for something or other, and you'd walk through, and there'd be one of the justices come along with a bunch of his clerks. In those days, they were all he's, although Sandra Day O'Connor eventually changed that.
She sure did, yeah.
But they were not that well recognized by the public, so you didn't have all the security that you probably have to have today.
Well, in Europe, they don't even know who they are.
Yeah. And that being
nobody
anonymous
even
on the
cares,
street is wonderful, I'm sure, for the person. I mean, they can do things that here they'd have to be much more cautious.
The only one that had his security with him was Roberts when he came over.
Okay.
He had to travel with it because he was the head of the branch.
Okay.
Whoever's head of the branch of government needs to travel with security, so he had his marshals with him.
Okay.
But other than that, they all came incognito, walked around town in jeans and short sleeve shirts, and no lederhosen, but they came.
Well, I won't hold you to that last part.
But on the other end, it's been a great experience for me.
Well, Barney Reams, we're nearing the end of today's conversation, but it's customary to ask if there's anything we haven't discussed that you'd like to bring up at this time.
Well, I think you've kind of hit it all. I'm appreciative of the opportunity. One of my future research interests, which I'm still developing, and I like to have finished before I retire, is a new book I'm working on the law of human experimentation. And I am in the process of starting that. I've got all the documentation put together. With this halftime coming up, I intend to get that book out as kind of my last scholarly work, and that's what I'd like to.
Well, at least your last plan. You'd be surprised. You probably have a lot of good years ahead, and maybe there'll be some project beyond that.
In August, I'll be 71 years old.
Well, that's not so
still,
old anymore. I have
still
a brother-in-law who's 91, and I feel like a mere kid around Bob.
Well, my mother's 93, and
Yeah.
she's still going, so yeah. But at any rate, I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I do appreciate the opportunity.
I think we're both about the same point in life,
Right.
and it's a nice time in life. I can do with these interviews. I can do what I want because nobody's depending on me for anything.
No,
anymore.
you've got the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you're right at your fingertips there.
Yeah.
Pat, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of not only myself for being part of this today, Barney, but on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Odak, and Vic Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the privilege of putting together these oral histories for the Spinelli's Law Library and Law Library reference shelf. I'm getting tongue-tied here. I apologize. Behind online.
And feel free to edit out anything you don't like. Okay. Thanks, man.
Well, I think I'll leave it all in because you didn't say anything bad about me on camera.
First rule. Thank you.